All right, good afternoon, and welcome to all of you that are in attendance here at the Command and General Staff College, and to those of you who are watching on the distance learning systems for this fourth presentation of academic year 2022 of the Command and General Staff School and the Command and General Staff College Foundation co-sponsored InterAgency Brown-Bag Lecture Series. For those of you I don't know, my name is Rod Cox. I'm with the Command and General Staff College Foundation, and on behalf of my partner, the Command and General Staff School, Colonel Tommy Cardoni, and Mr. Marv Nichols, who's there, it's our pleasure to present this lecture series to enhance the interagency awareness and education as part of the extracurricular activities here at Command and General Staff College. This lecture series is made possible by support from the Pro Foundation and from our local sponsors here, the First Command Financial Services. And where are my First Command guys? Thank you all very much. If you have any desires to talk to anybody about financial planning, I recommend you see them. But thank you for supporting the series. We couldn't do events like this without your help. Our next brown bag, I'll make a note for you. There's a board right up here to my right, your left. Take a picture of that with your phone if you'd like. But our next event is scheduled 23 February, where we'll be discussing the U.S. Department of State. The location will be here in the Arnold Conference Room, same time, 12:30 to 1:30. It'll be a good opportunity for you and your students and fellow faculty to learn about the State Department, which is another department of the government, obviously, that interagency professionals should know about. I hope you plan to join us. All right, today's presentation will be recorded for use by the distance learning and satellite students. It's also being broadcast here over Blackboard, and I will later hang it for IA practitioners around the world on my website, so you can find it on YouTube, my YouTube channel there, the Foundation site, if you wish. So what that means here locally is while we're in the presentation, if you want to engage with the speaker, I ask that you move forward. If you're not sitting at, it looks like we've got maybe just one here, move on up, buddy. Speak into the microphone so that everybody can hear you here locally, but also then it'll be picked up on the tape. You don't need to do anything. The AV tech in the booth will turn it on, just start speaking, and he'll pick you up for that. But I would ask you to be aware of that we want others to be able to hear that at the outstations. Okay, so to today's event. Very often, many of us have had the opportunity to work with or work for someone called an SES or Senior Executive Service member. And I suspect we all have our own ideas about who those people are and what is it they're supposed to do. Are they civilian generals? Are they political appointees? Are they professional bureaucrats? All those things come to mind as I've talked to some students around here the last couple of weeks about who are SESs and what do you know about them. Well, in today's presentation is designed to educate us all on this group of key leaders across our government. Quoting from the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, the SES was established to ensure that the executive management of the government of the United States is responsive to the needs, policies, and goals of the nation, and otherwise is of the highest quality. That statement lays out that these leaders possess well-honed executive skills and share a broad perspective on government and have a public service commitment that is grounded in the Constitution. Members of the SES, or the Senior Executive Service, operate and oversee nearly every government activity in over 70 federal agencies. That's why it's important for us to learn about what it is these folks do. Our speaker today has been a member of the Senior Executive Service since 2010. Mr. Michael D. Formica currently serves as the Deputy of the Commanding General, Combined Arms Center in Fort Leavenworth. He's previously served as the Director, U.S. Army Installation Command, Europe, and is the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, G357, and Deputy G3 for Training, U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command at Fort Eustis. Mr. Formica retired from the U.S. Army in 2009 after 27 years of service, with duties that included service as the commander of the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division, during Operation Iraqi Freedom II. In 2017, he was awarded Presidential Meritorious Rank Recognition. He holds a BA from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, an MS in Public Administration from UMKC, and an MS in National Security Affairs from the U.S. Army War College. Please welcome Mr. Michael Formica.
Hey, Rod, thanks for that introduction, and thank you and your sponsor for hosting these events. I've attempted to come to many of these, and for some reason, the duties that I possess as the deputy prevent me, but asking me to present kept me on target to be here today, so thanks for that. So like many of you in the room, and the ones that I'm looking at, you're mature and you're gray, and you're perhaps challenged by how much hair's on your head. But like many of you, it was 29 years ago that I was here as a student at CGSC. And prior to coming here, I had been a company commander in the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and I'd served in the Pentagon. And I'd served on the Joint Staff as a intern on the Joint Staff, and I'd served on the Army staff in the Army Initiatives Group as a senior colonel or senior captain. And I got to tell you, I never saw an SES, all right? I saw some Army civilians, but mostly I saw soldiers. And that was then. And that was an Army. You know, for me, it was before I was actually on the Joint Staff as Desert Shield kicked off. You know, went to Armored Branch, said, get me into the war. They said, thank you very much. And I was on the Army staff for Desert Storm, okay? And we had an Army of 750,000 active component soldiers, okay? And over the next 10 years, okay, we witnessed a change in the complexion of our Army. We went from an Army of about that size down to an Army of 500,000 or so, and now an Army of about moving towards 485,000, right? And the Army made some hard decisions at that point in terms of, you know, the complexion of the Army, as I state, right? And it really began to appreciate the need for an Army civilian corps to perform tasks that previously we had some of the luxury for soldiers to perform. And we needed to get soldiers into those tasks that only soldiers could perform and you know, invest in an Army civilian corps. And so you heard the congressional law of 78, okay, and why an SES Corps, but I will tell you my personal experience is that really took root in the Army and perhaps the Department of Defense, but certainly the Army as a result of a downsizing of an Army in that period of time, okay? And what I'm going to walk you through today is, we're going to get to the SES piece, but I really want to stress, and again, I'm looking to a number of Army civilian professionals in this room, and I'm hoping that at some point there are or will be students that watch this, because young majors entering at the level they graduate from this school will have an opportunity to serve with Army civilian professionals and very likely serve with senior executive service members as well. And so I think it's important that we talk about the Army Civilian Corps before we even get into the SES piece, okay? So let's go to the next slide, please. If we could bring up the next slide. All right, one more. Okay, so these are the things I really want to cover here. Why does this matter, okay? And then we'll get into the total Army, the profession, the civilian professional, and then the role of folks like myself, okay? But why it matters, okay? It matters for the reasons I just stated, all right? It matters to the group of officers that will be graduating from here that will be expected to serve in tactical, operational, and strategic staffs and formations, in which they will have to serve with Army civilians and perhaps be led by or work with the senior executive service as well. I think it's important that as part of that education, they understand us for what we contribute. They hold us accountable to the Army profession, just like we hold the uniformed cohort responsible, etc. But rather than come into it with, you know, the old lady in tennis shoes perspective that many of us of my generation had for the Army Civilian Corps, right? They need to recognize the contributions to the team. So let's go to the next slide. And this is sort of just a stage setter. And many of you may know this, but I want to highlight it, okay? So those are the components of the Army, right? There's Compo 1, the regular Army. There's Compo 2, which is the National Guard. Compo 3, our Army Reserve. And then there's the Army Civilian Corps. Total force of about 1.3 million individuals, okay? You can see 300,000 of us are Army civilians, a sizable portion, generally focused on what we call the generating force. Places like here, all right? We produce future readiness, or we enable readiness in terms of deployment, materiel conditions, those kinds of things. Big stakeholders, obviously, Army Materiel Command, okay? Training and Doctrine Command, large number of civilians inside that formation. Obviously, the Army staff, okay? The Corps of Engineers, significant number of civilians inside that formation. The SES Corps compared to this, all right? 300,000 civilians, 261 SESs. So about 0.09% of the Army are SESs. When you put that on top of the total Army, it comes out to be 0.02%. The reason that strikes me is the senior individual performing the duties of the Undersecretary of the Army right now is Chris Lohman. He is an SES. He's a friend of mine. We've gone to senior leader courses together, and he provided those stats at AUSA to a group of SESs, and I thought, holy smokes. And why was that important? Because Chris Lohman went from being just an SES to the acting Undersecretary of the Army, and that was important for the Army to maintain its momentum. And he is, unlike me, and you'll see some of those demographics, and I suspect some of you, he never served a day in his life in a soldier's uniform, okay? He grew through the ranks to become an SES that was competent and capable to serve as our acting Undersecretary of the Army in a very challenging time, okay? By comparison, there's about 284 general officers in the Army right now, okay? Compo 1. Overall, that number's like, I want to say 710, 715 between all three components of general officers. So that's collectively between the SES Corps and the general officers, that is the senior leader management executives of our Department of the Army, okay? Next slide. All right, so every time we onboard new Army civilians here at the Combined Arms Center, either myself, Mike Johnson, Marv, I don't know if he put you in that role, okay, Ed Bonneman or Howie Brewington, we go over and we talk to that new cohort of Army civilians about them becoming professionals, okay? In 2010, and I just was walking in the door to be an SES at TRADOC headquarters, okay, in 2010, General Martin Dempsey made the decision that if we're going to have an Army profession, we're going to have a cohort that addresses, we're going to make sure the Army Civilian Corps is part of the Army profession, okay? And that's important because all those 3 C's apply to us. And I'm, again, speaking to the uniform cohort, majors, captains, promotables, to your civilian counterparts, okay? They got to be individuals of character, following the Army values. They got to be competent, means that we got to stress that they have individual development plans, that we ensure that their institutional training, their self-development, and their on-the-job training is meaningful so that they can be as competent as possible to serve the needs of our Army. And then they have to be individuals that are committed to the profession, okay? So it can't ring hollow to us if we're going to be an effective member, 300,000 strong, of an Army that needs us, okay? And so we drive that point home, okay? And as you're going to see later on, I mean, I take that very personal. I'm an SES. I sort of kind of own that. In every place I go, I feel it's my responsibility that we drive that level of professionalism and commitment inside of your Army Civilian Corps. We all take an oath, and again, uniform cohort on the outstations. Just like soldiers, we swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, okay? And we reaffirm that oath as well. So next slide, please. So this is just, I just wanted to present this to you because I said can't be hollow. Our Army recognized that, and in the upper right-hand corner, there's an Army People Strategy. And there are 2 implementation plans for the Army People Strategy. And strategies need implementation plans to be meaningful. Otherwise, they're just words, okay? And so there is a soldier implementation plan and there is a civilian implementation plan. And those are the 4 lines of effort associated with it. How do we acquire the best that we can get, okay? So that we're bringing talent in that is needed for the world that we're in and the world that we envision 10 to 15 years from now. How do we develop that talent? How do we employ that talent? And how do we retain that talent so that, again, our Army Civilian Corps is as effective as possible to support and produce readiness, okay, for our Army. And you know, these are the new strategic roles so that we can compete, we can be prepared to address crisis, if need be fight, and then consolidate gains across all those things. So just, you know, oh, by the way, TRADOC and the Combined Arms Center is responsible for the developed talent, okay, for the civilian line of effort. civilian implementation plan. Really, really hard-hitting stuff going on right now. And the last thing I'll share with you all is, and carry back with you is, we need to define our readiness level as part of the institutional Army, the generating force, to the same degree that we look at soldiers and their readiness levels, okay? All right, so for an example, the Army Management Staff College, a great part of Army University, all right, responsible for the professional military education for all our supervisors and oncoming civilians with the foundation course, et cetera, basic, intermediate, and advanced course. There are about 38,000 of us that are supervisors. There are 50% of us that have attended the appropriate level of CES. The other 50% haven't gone for whatever reason. And if you've ever been to an AMSC course, it is an awesome course. Those are awesome courses, rather, okay? And those of you that have been soldiers and are now in this capacity, and those of you that are soldiers, can you imagine in a QTB, a brigade command sergeant major getting up and saying, hey, you know, all these people are supposed to go to this level of NCO PME. Yeah, I sort of only cared about 50% going, okay? Would not be acceptable. Your training readiness would not allow it to be that way. Your USR report would not allow it to be that way. Yet we have, as an Army, not invested in us or held us accountable enough to ensure the best trained and educated individuals are serving as our supervisors to lead that 300,000 folk that we're talking about. Okay, all right, next slide. All right, I just wanted to share some demographics. So in '76, you could see where we were as an Army in terms of the grade structures and how we have increased in the upper grades. Again, that goes to that level of management requirement when the Army went from 750,000 or so down, okay? And you can see how we divested of some of the lower grades. Again, senior level. These numbers are generally reflective of Fort Leavenworth as well in terms of demographics, okay? So an older population, not necessarily a good thing. It's a good thing from an experience level. A lot of us come from being soldiers to move into here, but when we are facing a world in which technology and innovation, some of those things are difficult for non-natives like myself to master, we've got to figure a way to entice younger generations through interns and fellowships, et cetera. As I said, 50% veterans, 20% of those veterans are retired, okay? And you can see the demographic between male and female, et cetera. We are addressing all those things as an Army, again, to make ourselves more diverse and more inclusive, because we absolutely believe that's better for the Army and better for the Army Civilian Corps in its support of the Army. I said 300,000. There are more Army civilians than there are Marines, okay? And that really is needed to perform the tasks that the Army is required to do and to be ready to do those in the future as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, so now I want to transition. Why an Army Civilian Corps? Why is it important for majors, graduates of this program to understand that? And now how does the SES fit into that? Okay, Rod shared with you the quote previously of the two types, and he sort of referenced it. You can have political appointees. So the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Manning and Reserve Affairs, is an SES, okay? But that person is a political appointed SES. It goes through the political screening process with, is I'm sure much more rigorous than the process that I had to go through to become an SES. I am a general SES, not a general, okay, or also referred to as a career SES, okay? Across the entire federal government, there are 8,000 of us, okay? Inside of the Army, as I shared, I think we have authorizations for 280. We have manned ourselves to 261 and look to even go lower. Okay, just because of the challenges associated with fiscal constraints, et cetera. Okay, and every day it's a matter of making sure that we are needed in the positions that we're at. Okay, as you're going to see when I talk about the hiring process, the focus really for most of us. Now there are some that are engineers. technical, very focused on technical. But most of the SES Corps is focused on enterprise leadership. And so when we look for candidates to move into the SES Corps, we are looking for individuals that have demonstrated that to some capacity as either as a uniformed officer or non-commissioned officer or as a civilian at the grades of GS 14 or 15. When I say enterprise, I'm talking about understanding the relationships across the Army or across an aspect of the Army associated with people, time, and dollars, okay, and how those three things interplay to accomplish outcomes and objectives. It specifically talks about us being in charge of an organizational unit, in my case being a deputy to an organizational unit, and being directly held accountable for production associated with that, which is part of our, for lack of a better term, support form effort that we do, much like our officer and non-commissioned officer corps does. We are also tasked for, and deputies do this a lot, those of you that are, monitoring the progress towards those goals and evaluating and determining how to improve the program to accomplish goals in the most efficient way. Policy making, determining, that's generally at the Department of the Army level, okay? We attempt to influence and shape, but primarily that's a departmental level effort. And this is the one that I have found in my 11 or so years, coming on 12 years, the continuity. So I have been here almost 3 years, and there have been 3 commanding generals. Came in under Lieutenant General Mike Lundy, then Jim Rainey, and now Ted Martin. And the benefit of having me present in an enterprise role, okay, is that I could ensure the things that Mike Lundy started, that our Army endorsed, all right, were being continued by the organization, tweaked to some degree by Jim Rainey, okay, and then carried forward to Ted Martin, all right? So that we didn't have, and it's debatable, those of you in this room, an episodic up and down approach to those kinds of things. But I think you would agree that over time, we've been pretty consistent in the priorities of this command. And more importantly, as that continuity, me carrying that message, or folks like me and the other Army civilian professionals carrying that message forward to maintain the resources to enable those priorities to occur. And every one of us has a learning curve when you come into an organization, and 3-star generals are no different. And so we are the enabler of that learning curve. We are the confidant that shares with, here is the pitfall that we recognized, here is some things that might make us more successful, etc., as we move forward. What we cannot be, and this is why I'm a strong advocate for mobility, is we can't be here so long that when the guy 2 from now comes in and says, I have a great idea, and we say, yeah, but, okay? We got to say, okay, let's take a look at that great idea, and we mean that sincerely, and recognizing the changing conditions. It may not have worked 3 years ago, but in the new world, it might work. And so have to have an open mind to be able to do that. And in my experience, living this now in 3 different assignments, generally at about the 4 to 5 year mark, you start to get to be yeah button, okay? And continuity cannot be that, all right? And mobility, which is one of the hallmarks of the SES Corps, being able to move when the Army wants you to, helps prevent that human tendency from occurring. And we are not this. I have no command authority, don't want any command authority, okay? I don't run around telling people, do this, that, or the other. It is always in support of the command or the Army. And I know that it sounds kind of wishy-washy, but it is a fact. There's an SES pin, all right? We don't wear that. It's like your actions speak louder than your words, or the little thing that you wear on your lapel, right? Don't want to be perceived that way. Now, break. I have no problem at the level I'm at Tier 2, having a first name conversation with the Major General in the Army. And that's important. I mean, you got to be able to have that kind of teaming approach, right? And so on and so forth. And I have no problem with, and I expect brigadier generals to call me by my first name. I will not call a 3-star general by his first name. Just ain't right, okay? I respect the rank, all right? But I'm a civilian, and Chuck Lombardo can call me Mike for Mike any time of the week, okay? Don Hill can call me Mike, and he does. As a 2-star, he does. Now, some of them are uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be. Not general officers. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so oftentimes, and again, I got a large civilian cohort in the room here with us, you may or may not know how this all works, and I had no freaking clue how this works, okay, until I received a call one day, and I had, served in TRADOC, I had retired, I was a contractor, and I got a call, and the call was, hey, so-and-so is about to retire, and we wanted you to know that if you want to compete for that position, all right? So I said, okay, I'll dig into that. Well, hokey smokes, it took a 4-day weekend. It is a right for your life exercise, explaining the things that, lead change, lead people, build coalitions, business acumen, and produce results with truthful examples of how you did that. And for me, that was as a colonel, okay, a colonel in command, a colonel on Joint Forces Command, and a colonel as the executive officer of the CG TRADOC, okay, how I had demonstrated skills in each one of those things, okay? And then that gets thrown into a gonculator, a bunch of people, other SESs look at that, and then a slate comes back to the selecting official saying, of the 100 people that applied for this position, we think 5 are qualified. Okay, much like we do in any civilian resume review, except for the resume really is what are called executive core qualifications, ECQs. All right, and then it goes into the black hole, right? You get an interview coming out a little bit out of that black hole by the command, and then it goes into another black hole. And this thing gets vetted everywhere in the executive department or executive agency. It does not get vetted by Congress, but the Office of Personnel Management has to review it. They dig into all your background to make sure you don't have any IG complaints or convictions, all those kinds of things. And then ultimately it comes to the Secretary of the Army as, if you want this dude or dudette, you can hire this person. That all takes about 6 months. And there are no data checks along the way. It's just you sort of throw your hat in the ring, go through all that process, and wait to see what comes out. The consistency in that process is absolutely essential, okay? Congress will only allow, or better say, Congress will only stay out of it as long as the agency has demonstrated rigor in that process. And the Department of Defense has established great rigor in that process, and the Army, as a subordinate organization of the Department of Defense, abides by that as well. I have been part of that screening panel, if you will, and it is really humbling to see the talent that comes through in these applications, and the challenge it presents to organizations to hire folks, given all the talent that's out there as well. Remember, about 261 or so. We are in tiers: Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Okay. Tier 1 are the entry positions. Tier 2 is where I'm at right now, and Tier 3 and there are only 25 Tier 3s in the Army, okay? Tier 3 is at the higher level. Generally, the ACOM and the deputies to Army principals are the Tier 3 positions. Generally speaking, to go from one to the other is a competition, okay? So when I was to come here, I had to be interviewed to come here, okay? It wasn't like, and I was a Tier 2. I was a Tier 2 at Installation Management Command Europe, and it wasn't just like for Mike to do that, okay? When I went from Tier 1 to Tier 2 for IMCOM, from TRADOC to IMCOM, it was a 3-member panel, 2 general officers and a Tier 3 SES interviewing me after I presented, updates on my core qualifications, et cetera, to compete for that position. And then again, there is a process that enables the advancement, okay? Last point I'll share on the SES program in and itself. Every year, We all do, much like the officer cohort used to do. I think with the marketplace, it's no longer as important. But we all do, dream sheet kind of stuff. And they want you to forecast when you're going to retire. And they want you to forecast, between now and then, near term, 1 to 3 years, where would you like to serve? 3 to 5 years, deeper, where would you like to serve? Okay? And then a panel of general officers and Tier 3 senior executives review every file of all 260 of us. And then you get a notice that says, hey, you're doing really good, stay where you're at. Okay? Or you're doing really good and we want to broaden you, like they did with me, and we want to move you from Europe to Combined Arms Center. Or you're doing really good and it's time for upward mobility, and so you'll be on slates for possible advancement to Tier 2 or Tier 3. Okay, so there is a very good process inside of the Army to manage the talent against known departure dates for individuals and the needs of the Army as well. Okay, and so when Mr. Smith determines at Army Materiel Command, I'm going to retire 6 months from now, and that's the professional thing to do, is to give enough time. Then they go back and they say, hey, Smith's position, we had 4 or 5 people that we had on a slate, because Smith had told us that somewhere in 23 he was going to retire, okay? And we got 4 or 5 people that we have a slate for. AMC, why don't you interview those 4 or 5 people and tell us which one of those individuals you would like to backfill Mr. Smith, okay? And that's how the progression works as well. Okay, next slide. All right, so I briefly touched on enterprise leadership, but what goes into that, okay? And I was fortunate that I'd had the opportunity to serve in Joint Forces Command when it existed, obviously, and then as the executive officer to the TRADOC commander. Up till that time, I had no flipping idea how the Army ran. I mean, I understood how a brigade combat team and a division operated, but I really didn't have a full appreciation of how the Army ran. I know in Cash Cube, I got the rolling donuts and I got all that kind of stuff about PBBS, etc. But I will tell you, when I became an XO, I saw first, and in Joint Forces Command, I saw firsthand how all that comes together. And those are the kinds of skills that we need to have, is to understand how those processes work. As you've heard me say, be passionate about it and recognize that it is service, and so you've got to be vested in it as well, okay? I think General Martin shared with me, one of the things that he expects me to do is to appreciate what every one of our subordinate organizations do. So that's Army University, Combined Arms Center for Training, and Mission Command Center of Excellence, as well as you got Sharp Academy and we got DLI. Understand what they're doing, how it fits in their priorities, be aware of, and connect dots, okay? And so when we look at the programming to make sure that the interests of those organizations are being accounted for inside of TRADOC, to ensure that General Hill's priorities have been recognized as we build our input into the program from a TRADOC perspective. That's the work that you got to be able to do at the enterprise level that enables that environment to be accounted for and the Army to be best serviced by. Now, we don't win all the time, and it's my job to try to win as much as possible, and I'll define win as getting as what we believe to be the resources required. Great. But have an eye on what's most important to the Army. And sometimes, and we should always think this way, is what's best for the Army is best for the Combined Arms Center. And that there is a point in which you recognize that, and again, that's the continuity and the experience that senior executives bring to this. So the next point on depth is sort of a bit of a challenge to the mobility piece. So how long can you be in one place enough to provide continuity without becoming stale, okay, and be able to maintain the critical service? My perspective is That's about 5 to 6 years max, okay? And it doesn't mean you have to change locations. I look at TRADOC headquarters. A good friend of mine, Mr. Dave Brinkley. Dave was the G35 for TRADOC when I was the deputy G357, and Dave became the G14 in TRADOC, okay? So he was selected for advancement from Tier 1 to a Tier 2 position, and he got to stay in Fort Eustis, Virginia, okay? It was good for the Army because we had continuity, and it was good for the Brinkleys because they got to stay in the same location as well, okay? Pentagon, same kind of thing. I mean, they can move down the hall to a different position, all right? Not the same at Fort Leonard Wood or Fort Benning or Fort Sill, where there's one SES, okay? And that individual, is challenged by how long he or she can remain fresh. So our Army solution to that is you sign a mobility agreement, and when the Army says we think it's time for you to move, you're going to move to be able to demonstrate your skills elsewhere and support the Army. All right. Last thing I just wanted to share with you is, and I sort of tip my hat on it, leader development, okay? I am absolutely invested in it. In the 3 places I have served, I took a personal responsibility for that for our organizations, and now I'm responsible for line of effort 2 on the civilian implementation plan and driving the Army to embrace the requirements for civilian leader development, having a supervisory development program that ensures that we've got the best leaders and ensuring that we are resourcing ourselves and holding us accountable to ensure our supervisors are properly trained. For the military cohort, for CGSC students and soon-to-be graduates, okay, you may ask and you will likely be a supervisor of Army civilians at some point, okay? And you may be supervised by Army civilians at some point as well. The requirements for supervisor development course are for you as well. And they are challenging, but we've developed a pretty good program that the Army has employed, which, there's online training, there's face-to-face training, and then there's annual refresher, every 3-year refresher training. You got to do that because while many of us were in uniform, the requirements associated with managing civilians, hiring civilians, paying allowances for civilians, et cetera, require a fundamental understanding of those things so that you don't accidentally, through ignorance, step into a minefield that is sometimes hard to get out of. And that's one of the actions. But I would tell you, my experience is that leadership, regardless of cohort, is the same. Okay, it's describing a vision and then motivating people towards a vision based upon the outcome that's best for the organization. So you should have no problem there as well. All right, so again, I hope that helps you. What I attempted to do here today was to give you a sense of why this matters. All right, 300,000 as part of a 1.3 million person Army. Part of the profession from the GS2 to the SES. Same requirements that we expect of the uniform cohort for character, competence, and commitment. Our responsibility to ensure that's present in the civilian cohort, and how the SES Corps is designed to provide continuity and then to provide leadership at the enterprise and at the organizational level to ensure our Army's readiness currently and in the future is best attained and sustained. Okay? And so with that, I open it up for any questions that you all may have. I am stunned. Rod, go ahead.
Sir, I have a question. First talks, it goes back to when you said we're not general officers, senior executive.
Yeah.
What is the protocol associated with senior executives?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Okay, so a general officer of the equivalent protocol stature will always be above a senior executive. Okay, so if Don Hill and I were in a room and protocol was setting up seating, Don Hill, whatever that is, Don Hill would have the seat of greatest, ranking in that setting. Okay, so does that help answer that question?
that puts it in context with two-star, but what about the rest?
Yeah, so
You get three levels of SES.
tier 1 with 1 star, tier 3 with 3 star, okay. And regardless of quote unquote when you entered service, that general officer always supersedes the executive, okay? And that's all good, okay? Hey, Mark, how are you? Well, I was over here.
Step up to the microphone, please, so you can be caught on tape for your question.
Mark, did you have a question?
No, I was just saying, but Mr. Formica is sir to me, so even us in uniform that are junior and grade to Mr. Formica, we would still address him as sir or Mr. Formica.
Or Mr. Formica, thanks. And Mark is the Combined Arms Center G1. Okay, thank you, Mark. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Portfolio, what occupies most of your time on a daily basis?
Yeah, hey, that's a great question. Up and out occupies most of my time on a daily basis. All right, so and thanks for asking that. Let me give you it wasn't always that way. All right, when I was at IMCOM Europe, okay, responsible for the 90 plus installations across all of Europe for the United States Army, 2014 to 2019. You know, Crimea happened, terrorist attacks happened. I was down and in a lot, all right? And I went to this SES course, which I always hate to do, and I always tell the AMSE classes, I hate to do this. I hate to go to those courses just like y'all, but I always walk out better, okay? And they said, I want you to write down on a piece of paper on a daily and then weekly basis what you do, all right? Then, how many of those are down and in, and how many of those, and the majority of mine were down and in. And they said, look, we didn't hire you to be a senior executive to be focused down and in. You've got great subordinates that focus down and in. You've got great chiefs of staff that focus down and in. We hired you to be up and out, okay? And coincidentally, I go back and I had this new chief of staff who, I should have read the body language, all right? GS-15, chief of staff of IMCOM Europe. And she said, hey, sir, can we talk? What's up, Carrie? She said, every morning there's an update. Every evening there's a closeout. You know, I got this. And I said, you're absolutely right. I just learned you should have this. And I became much, much more effective, furthering the requirements of the United States Army Europe, which is what my task was, okay, by being focused up and out and giving clear guidance and intent, and the chief of staff and all those great directors work down and in, okay? And we're blessed here. You know, I have to tell Marv, Mike, Ed, Howie, and their GOs, where do you need my help? Okay, I don't have a lick to do in your fights, but I'll solve problems above you to get resources, you know, coordinate, you know, senior leader schedule, whatever it is. So that's up and out. Okay, thanks. Yep. And the last thing I'll share on that, and I did not talk about this, which is absolutely, two things are probably more, but two that come to my head right off the bat. Credibility. So you got to mean what you say, and you got to be transparent when you're saying it, okay? And that reputation leads to relationships. You can't be up and out based upon formal lines of authority or any of that. It's all got to be based upon when Formica speaks, he's transparent, there are no hidden agendas, he's trustworthy, he's credible, and we have lunch, okay? I go to the Pentagon, there are people, I said, can we sit down and build relationships, okay? And likewise, okay? That's absolutely essential for up and out. Thanks. Yep, sir.
Sir, good afternoon. Troy Sparks, Department of Command and Leadership. Sir, is there a formal, informal SES pipeline, kind of go back to the vein that you were just talking about, that kind of develops you to assume those roles?
Yeah, and so that's a great question. And there is a somewhat formal, we've got enterprise talent management programs and senior enterprise talent management programs for the civilian cohort, okay? Enterprise is developing individuals to be GS-13, 14 leaders. Senior enterprise really are taking 14s and 15s and posturing them to be, contenders for SES. Now, it's really important. Again, I'm in this uniform now for almost 12 years, so I I fondly remember my time as a soldier, but I am now an Army civilian, right? And I express and am devoted to the GS, you pick the grade that wants to advance. And I fully recognize, like you and I, our Army developed us well, right? All the way from, initial entry through West Point or ROTC to Army War College. So when our packets go forward in competition with a civilian, there isn't always a true civilian. There isn't always a flat or fair environment. So I'm committed to that pipeline developing, John Doe, Jane Doe to be as competitive. Okay, and that CEDM program gets them into a senior service college. Okay, and perhaps an internship coming out of a senior service college that provides them broadening assignments, and hopefully a GS-15 position in which they're responsible for people, time, and dollars associated with an organizational mission, in which up and out leadership can be demonstrated to ensure that those three resources are managed correctly and successfully. Great question, thank you. Yep. Yes?
One part of your, first off, thank you for coming and speaking to us today. One part that really resonated with me was balancing that experience and continuity against what you called that yeah, but. And I thought that was very effective and really definitely resonated. What has been the most effective technique you've seen with helping your subordinates and peers step away from that yeah, but and embrace new initiatives and change?
Yeah. So the first thing is you got to inoculate them against it, and I do that, right? And part of that inoculation is, even inside of our own organization, and Mike Johnson's a classic example, okay, is recognize that they can only be in one place so long before that human tendency begins to emerge, okay, and try to maintain that mobility. So, Mike was at CAC-T for a number of years. Great work. Mike came to me and said, I'm just being forthright here, and anything I say, I'm sure he would not take exception or offense to. He looked at me and goes, I'm ready for a change. And I don't want to be that guy, all right, or that gal, all right. So circumstances, unfortunately, but enabled us for Mike to come here to be that. So that's part of it, mobility, right, broadening assignments. And then the other thing is, as a senior leader, you just constantly are watching for that in the subordinates, and you constantly challenge the assumptions, and this is what I do, and open all our eyes to, is the environment different than it was 3 years ago? And if so, how do we account for that? And I'm not to oversell it, but that kind of leadership generally wins the day. Now, they're going to be hanger-oners, right? And you know what happens then? I just discount them. That's just, you've heard the 20, 60, 20, right? That 20%, no value, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, okay, thanks. Great question, though. Any others?
Question, I'm chuckling because we're enterprise level leaders, but sometimes the empire strikes back. And you talk about these initiatives that we have to be more agile and adaptive, particularly in personnel and budget management and whatnot. Do you see any, and we talk about it on the active duty side, where the industrial old model is bouncing up against the AIM-2 initiatives and talent management. Do you see any seams opening up in either personnel management at the enterprise level or financial management that we can take advantage of to make the whole enterprise a little bit more agile than it is right now?
Yeah, so I think I understand what you're getting at.
Bureaucracy doesn't like moving.
Bureaucracy doesn't like moving, doesn't like changing?
Well,
adapting?
So let me ask it this way then. The closer you are to where the rubber meets the road, we tend to see some opportunities to align ourselves with what's changing out in the OE and changing with the generations below us look at things different and whatnot. And but at the enterprise level, either because of law or because of policy or whatnot, we're not as agile as we think we are.
Yeah.
And so senior leadership of the Army is directing us to be more agile. how do we get ourselves to be more agile? Are you seeing any opportunities particular to personnel management and budget?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, and thanks. And I think, just to rephrase it to some degree, there are opportunities at the grassroots level that may or may not, be recognized above, and so, I think we're going to be challenged, and here's why. Because 485, that may be the top number, okay? Army total obligation authority, probably at its highest level and challenged right now by inflation. So I think there's going to be, candidly, a lot more top-down driven belt tightening. And so that can present opportunity, okay, for innovation that demonstrates efficiency to be leveraged, okay? The challenge is, and I won't go in, but there's a true example that we are working through right now. The challenge is being able to turn that fast enough from when you recognize it to a product that you can sell, and I mean that sincerely, that people will say, yeah, that's better than a slice, okay? What you are doing makes much more sense, and so I accept that. The savings that you achieved, you can reinvest to do what you also need to do, and I'll take that 15% versus 25%, okay? But we're entering an environment that we have been in before. We had night courts, some of you may have heard that, okay, under the previous administration, to resource modernization. And the people that, from my experience, that were successful in night courts were the ones that were thoughtful enough and were able to build an argument based upon innovation, okay, that would enable them to counter the directed reduction, okay?
I think we all acknowledge that whether we're content with it or not, we know there's for financial resources, for instance, but if we could increase the velocity of a process, we'd be more content with less of a resource. And that's kind of what I was getting at. And the reason I'm asking that question is, my sense from watching AIM unfold, for instance, and that's not a civilian process, a military process, there is a tremendous amount of innovation on the table for personnel management on the military side, and for whatever reason, a cadre of folks that don't like that innovation because it's perceived loss of control at HRC or whatever. So we'll take less if we can do things faster to a reasonable extent, and that's what I was just wondering. Are you seeing anything on the horizon that would make the down traces job easier to manage people or finances from a velocity standpoint, I guess?
Yeah, I don't. And my up and out aperture isn't broad enough perhaps to see some of that. What we attempt to do, though, when that kind of innovation emerges, and please, if that's here, okay, and we feel stifled, I expect us to work through that, and that's not a condemnation. It's just, if that's the reality. Where I think and so AIM may be an example, okay? I'm not sure where it will be 3 or 4 years from now. There is a concern that, there are people that aren't getting what they're wanting, what's that doing? And, you and I grew up in an Army where you went where the Army told you to go. It was part of selfless service, okay? And our input was that dream sheet, right? Okay, and the needs of the Army, break. If you can pilot something, okay, probably overused, but if you can pilot something and try to work through some of that stuff, and but that's velocity too, and I got it. And in this world, I heard a quote this morning. It was amazing. Every Thursday morning, there's a 3-star session. It's called the Army Synchronization Meeting. The G3 and the DAS and the Army host it. And this morning, we were talking about an Army People Synchronization Conference that had yet to be scheduled for June, and they're supposed to happen every 6 months. Okay, and the DAS said, hey, I know in the Department of the Army we can't schedule beyond a week. Okay, but for the operational force, they've already filled up June. Okay, so we need to be thinking a little bit deeper about these critical events, and it is Army People Synchronization Conference. So great quote, but that's how they, velocity management. is hindered by the frickin' crisis of the moment as well. I'm sorry, those are terrible answers, but your points are well taken. All right. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, so hey, let me just get off the stage here by, first of all, or once again, thanking the foundation for providing me an opportunity to speak here. And I'm looking at a room full of Army civilian professionals, I think. I mean, we don't wear uniforms, but this is okay. And I suspect many of you are, soldiers for life as well. Okay, and thank you for all that you do here. Once upon a time, I came through just CGSC, there were no civilian instructors, okay? Everybody wore a uniform. Well, for all the same reasons I talked about, we now have great civilian instructors who are retired battalion or brigade level commanders, making this institution the great institution it is to produce our future leaders as well. And you are part of that fabric, so thank you very much for what you do there. And that's all I got. Who?
So on behalf of the foundation, I want to thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you contributing to our series. Once again, I'll remind all of you, our next presentation will be 23 February, Wednesday, 12:30 right here. We invite you to come learn about the State Department. Thank you.